When those temperatures are like super frigid, the warmest part of the day was something like when the sun's high in the sky, the warmest part of the day, like it could be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it could be noon, it could be 1 o'clock in the afternoon. A lot of deer, a lot of bucks are feeding during that the warmest part of the day. You think to yourself like, I gotta wait till it's really cold. But if you have like 6 degrees in the morning and you have 4 degrees at night, that middle range, like when it warms up, it's going to be 20 degrees. That's when they're going to get up and feed, because that's when they're going to lose the least amount of calories to do so.
Lights, camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera!
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio from the guys at Exodus.
All right, man, it's almost gun season here in Ohio.
Yeah, it's coming quick.
So like 3 or 4 days.
Yep.
Some guys are prepared for it. Some guys aren't.
If you still have a tag in your pocket, you're probably panicking a little bit.
My mind is already going to the late season, already knowing like this is a really busy time for us.
Yep.
As far as work-wise.
Black Friday sale, prepping for that.
The year-end stuff coming to a close. We have, the strategic stuff we try to lay out for the following year. It's really, really busy. A lot of us have been off for, as we talked about in the last couple episodes. We've been off part of November, on and off hunting.
Yep.
And trying to play catch up, and then also knowing there's just a lot in the books. So in my mind, I have zero intention of going out for Ohio firearm season.
Yeah, I'm gonna hunt PA rifle season because it comes in on a Saturday now. I'm able to hunt Saturday and Sunday. Monday I don't have an Ohio tag, but Monday I'll be filming Whitetail Cribs episodes with Johnny Stewart. So yeah, I'm pretty much PA rifle season Saturday, Sunday. If I don't kill anything then, next Saturday because you can't hunt that Sunday. So you have 3 more days left in PA with a gun.
Pennsylvania is giving you the first Sunday of the season.
Yep.
As the extra day.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So there's 3 Sundays now you can hunt.
Right.
The last Sunday in the last Sunday in archery season, the first Sunday in bear season, and then the first Sunday in rifle season.
Okay. Got it. So with that being said, I guess my mind is already going into the late season for here in Ohio. And I think that prep work probably needs to happen ASAP as soon as firearm season is over.
Yeah, I mean, maybe even before firearm season. If you run cameras for firearm season, like you can do that. You can use them for that. But in PA, where I'm hunting in rifle season, like I'm taking my cameras down. Even in Ohio on that piece of public that we have, I got to go pull that camera because there's going to be a lot of traffic in there.
Yeah.
Chances to get that camera stolen are greater. So I'm going to already take that camera and move it to where I'm anticipating my late season activity happening. So I'm doing that stuff now before firearm season, because you have this next 2 weeks or week or whatever your firearm season is. It's hectic. You're not going to pattern deer anyway. Most likely. If you don't push on your property, your neighbor probably does. So I'm taking my cell cameras and cameras now and getting them put in those areas for late season already.
One thing I do think on the cell camera front, if you do have time to hunt during the firearm season, I don't think it's a bad idea to leave your cell cameras up if you know that surrounding properties are going to have pressure.
Yeah.
Because if you're if you take the Sturgis approach and you're only hunting the best weather days and you're really limiting the pressure on your property, deer are going to end up being
pushed
moved
into yours.
into your area. So I would leave myself like this is just me talking. I'm not have zero intentions of hunting firearm season here in Ohio, but I would leave my cell cameras up just for that purpose, because if a big one did show up,
you can go get them.
You may have an opportunity to go get them.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so if you're moving your cameras after rifle season, what's your strategy behind your trail camera placement
for late season?
Yeah.
Well, I think for me it goes back to annual data, knowing certain pieces of property, certain areas turn on and certain areas are dead. Some of that revolves around food sources. Some of that revolves around does not being bred and coming back into estrus, and or yearlings becoming of 80 plus pounds, 85 plus pounds, 90 pounds, whatever it is.
Yeah, sexual maturity.
Sexual maturity, correct. So a lot of that revolves around the annual data that I've had in the past on those specific pieces. And to me, I already know that those dates are there. You have that 4-day window, 5-day window, whatever it is. If I have the opportunity to run cell cameras, I'm putting those in there right after gun season.
Yep.
That's my plan. Go in there after gun season, put those things up, and then basically sit and wait for a couple of weeks. And when that, I get those first few pictures, I know it's time to go. I know it's time to go. And I'm doing it after gun season only because I'm still trying to be pretty efficient with my time. There's a couple of things we have going in the late season. I would like to fill my Ohio tag, but we also have those Wisconsin tags.
Yep.
It's different in Wisconsin because, like, if I see 125-inch deer, it's dead. Yeah, I'm gonna try to shoot it. In Ohio, it's a little bit different, even in the late season. I'm not saying I'm targeting a specific deer because I haven't put the work in to do that this year. But in those areas, there's a certain caliber of deer that I want to be able to go after. And if they're not there, I'm not going to make the trip down because it's a 5-hour drive. So
Sure.
If that type of deer is not there, then I'm not going to go.
Sure.
So that's kind of what I'm looking at there.
Yeah, and that time period after the gun season is you have a week or so until the deer start to get back on a pattern. And that's why the late season can be so good, is because they're back on that bed to food pattern. Bucks have been running wild for a month and a half, a month, and then they physically have to put on the pounds to make it through the end of the year. So they're conserving energy a lot and they're eating a lot. So that's like when the late season, if you're running cell cameras, you know where the food is, you work it backwards a little bit, find where the bed is. And if you're anticipating like a harsh winter, the deer are going to have to get up and feed to survive. So that's why a lot of the best deer hunters in the world that are killing giant mature bucks look forward to the late season because they're a little bit more patternable. And I was listening to a podcast with Heath Cisco, which they call him the Iceman because he's constantly getting it done in the late season. And he was talking about that pattern and how Ohio's tough because you have that 1 week gun season. And he was talking about how that first week of December, deer are really trying to pound food. Like they're just getting off does. They're really trying to pound food to go search for that next hot doe, or because they just need food to survive. And then, so you have that 1 week gun season. And then you're like, okay, deer start to get back on that pattern after that gun season ends. And then, boom, Ohio drops 2 more days of gun hunting. So that's going to get hammered.
Yep.
And then you have a week or so. And then you have a muzzleloader season. So he isn't really able to get those deer on that pattern until January when that muzzleloader season ends. So it's kind of tough if you have a bunch of different firearm seasons coming in. But if you are hunting a piece of property that's heavily managed, or you can kind of control the pressure, you know what's going on around you, getting a deer on a pattern from bed to food in the late season is absolutely deadly.
Yeah, there's no argument there. I mean, it's talked about a lot. Don Higgins is another guy that talks about hunting in the late season a ton, obviously with the food plot business, real world, and the habitat improvement business, the management side of things. Don talks about it a lot. But I guess to your point about Heath's approach and like the struggle with those, I guess, intermediate muzzleloader seasons, that second firearm season, and then you have a couple week break, and then you have the muzzle. I'm counting that muzzleloader season as like part of
firearm
my late
season.
No, I'm counting that as like part of my late season.
Okay.
So my late season stuff includes muzzleloader season. Like it's not like I have no problem. I'm actually looking forward to hunting with a muzzleloader. It's been several years since I've been able to do that. But I'm counting that muzzleloader season as part of my late season. strategy. And actually, it's kind of, for me, it's really pivotal
That
because
time of year,
yeah.
those dates, it just falls like magically in place where you can use a firearm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to take every advantage I can get.
Sure.
From my perspective, I want to go back to one of the things that we were talking about yesterday, as you were listening to the Heath Cisco podcast that we did with him. Was that last year or was that 2 years ago?
Last year.
Okay, last year. And that is what he's doing with cell cameras, and it's fresh on your mind. So I want you to kind of, I guess, just recap.
Sure. Yeah. That conversation was really good, and if you're wanting to up your game in the late season, I suggest just going back and listening to that. But I'll kind of break down what he's talking about, what he's doing with his cell cameras. So he has obviously his cameras are on food, and he talks about putting those cameras on different types of food source, anticipating different weather. So in the past, recently here in Ohio, the past couple years, the winters have been fairly mild, and the food source that a deer is going to want to target in a mild winter is different than in harsh cold temperatures. So he's running his cameras on a lot of green food sources during those mild temperature ranges. So if you're looking on the forecast for the next 14 days, you're going to have 40-degree temperatures. Deer are going to want to target green food sources if they're available. So clover, brassicas, winter wheat, winter rye, those food sources that are still green are what's more palatable in those 40-degree mild winter temperatures. But if the super, super cold, frigid temperatures are coming, they're going to be on the grains. The cut corn, the cut beans, or standing beans if you have them, standing corn if you have them, the heavy grain, high carb, high fat diet, that's what they're going to gravitate to when the temperatures really plummet. And that's what he looks forward to. And he was talking about something that hit me, and I was like, man, I can't believe it's a really simple strategy, but it's got to be super deadly. So what he'll do with his cell cameras, he will check the forecast and see a big storm's coming, right? And he'll be like, okay, my grains are going to be heavily fed on. So he's paying super close attention to those cell cameras around those food sources. And you get a big snowstorm comes in, you get 4 or 5 inches of snow on the ground, you have a fresh powder snow on the ground, you get the picture of the deer that you anticipate getting, no matter what time of day it is. Say that deer comes in 45 minutes after dark. He goes in the next day, finds the biggest track, and just follows it to where it's going. And what he was talking about, in this particular case, he was getting a picture of this deer once a week, or every 3 days or every 4 days, and it wasn't super consistent. And he was talking about, like, you're not going to kill that deer if you're getting a picture of him once a week or every 4 days or so. You don't have that deer on a pattern, and you can't then anticipate what he's going to do around a weather front. So he tracked that deer's track, followed where he went, and actually found that deer's bed and found where he was living, and then found the primary food source that he wanted to be at because of that fresh snow. And he just tracked them back, took his camera down, put it on the other food source, had him every day, had that deer every day, and then he killed him.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, duh. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
Pretty simple. Like when you look at it in hindsight, right?
But I think why I don't think of that, or why I didn't think of that as like a strategy, is because in the late season I almost feel like I shouldn't scout anymore. I feel like it's too sensitive. A lot of guys talk about how sensitive that time of year is. Deer are on edge. They've been run like crazy for the last 3 weeks. But he will start scouting after gun season ends. He will then go scout and see where the deer are feeding and hanging out. And that's how he kills a lot of his deer in the late season, is because he doesn't stop scouting then. Because if you're not, like he said, if you don't have that deer every day, you then can't use your knowledge about what a deer is going to do around a weather front and capitalize on it, because that deer might not be there.
Right. That's that ties into one thing I actually wanted to talk about in this episode, and that's a mistake that I've made in the past, and that is thinking almost that same exact scenario, right? You get a picture of a deer, infrequently. I'll call it infrequently. Like, so whether that's every 3 or 4 days, maybe it's once a week, maybe it's like once a month, or once every couple weeks. But in the past, and I'm saying past, like I'm going to go back 5 to 7 years. Like, in my mind, everybody talks about hunting cold fronts. Everybody talks about food sources in the late season. And you would see these big weather fronts roll in. And in my mind, I'm like, all right, this deer is going to magically just show up on this food source, even though I've only seen him 3 or 4 times on camera. But there's a giant cold front coming. Everybody talks about it.
Here he's coming.
He's going to be there. And you go out and you hunt the backside of the front, or the front side and the backside, and nothing happens.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
where's he at?
That didn't work.
Yeah.
And not only did it not work, did I not see him from the stand, but I had no camera pictures of him at the same point. So, it's one of those things where, like, to your point, to Heath's point, if you don't have that deer on some type of pattern, if you don't have information about that deer, he is not magically just going to show up because it's 0 degrees out. And
yeah, he's going to be somewhere.
Yeah, well, yeah, he will be somewhere. But I'm saying, if you are taking my approach, thinking that deer is just going to magically show up on your property because there's a cold front rolling in and you have food, like, that's not the case. Like,
no.
I'm sure you can get lucky once every blue moon or something and have one show up like that, but the majority of the time it's not going to work.
No, so the key to that is to continue to scout with your cameras. You have to have that camera in the right spot. You have to be where that deer wants to be able to capitalize on where he's going to be when that cold front moves in. Something I wanted to talk about too is, like, what are the key, like, what do you look for? What's the key? When do you know when it's time to strike? If you have that deer coming in 45 minutes after dark, he's coming to your food source, or maybe it's an hour after dark, he's coming to your food source. What are the things that you're looking for in the forecast to know, okay, when this hits, that's when it's time to go? Because a lot of times deer they're not moving very far to that food source in the late season. They're trying to conserve their energy.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to put on a bunch of pounds, but what it takes them, it burns calories for them to get to the food source, so they're not going to travel super far. In ag ground especially. I mean, in the big woods, they're going to have to travel a little bit further for food. But talking about where heavy food sources are prevalent, what are the triggers that you're looking for to know, okay, now it's time to strike?
The trigger that I think that I've looked for in the past, and I think just even from running, a large number of cell cameras the last few years, to me, it's wind speed is a giant deal.
Oh yeah,
giant deal. And, like, I think last year was probably maybe it was 2 years ago. 2 years ago was the first, like, aha moment about wind speed, like watching cell cameras shut off and light up.
Yep.
Based on wind speed. So wind speed, obviously temperature drop is one of them. I think precipitation is also on that list, but I think it's probably the third.
Okay.
If I were to rank these and, like, prioritize them, I think wind speed, temp drop, and then precipitation is probably the third thing I look for. But with all of these things, and to the point about scouting that I want to mention is how bedding changes. Don Higgins talks a lot about the biology of a deer. Maybe not a lot, but I've heard him talk about this in the past, from having that deer farm, from him paying close attention to their feeding habits, and then the biology of a deer and how its metabolism actually slows down in the winter. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people have this, and when I say a lot of people, myself included, until I did a little more learning, a little more research, a little more listening, a little more reading on the topic. But it's like, okay, these deer have just gone through the rut, the breeding phase, and they need to eat more to, I guess, rehab their body, like nutrition. They need to have more nutrition intake. And what Don was talking about on that topic was that that's something that he did not see in his private deer farm when he was just monitoring and watching these deer. They weren't necessarily feeding more or consuming more food as the temperature dropped because their metabolism is changing. But they would move earlier in the day based on different weather triggers.
Sure.
So I think that's one important thing to keep in the back of your mind. And then two is going back to how bedding changes. It's there. I think that there's two things there. One is obviously security. So that is pressure still number one.
Yep.
But then also the thermal protection that bedding offers. Like, so we've talked about this in the past as you see bedding shift change as habitat changes on a piece. We did a video about that on I think YouTube last year, and we talked about, we went in postseason and found different beds and how the bedding both for does and bucks kind of shifted throughout the season. But to your point, I do think that bedding hierarchy, it shrinks a ton when it gets into these late season, into these cold temperatures. I think that deer start to
Herd up.
group back up, and you see multiple bucks with a lot of other deer. So that I don't know if they become more social per se, but I do think it's just based on trying to conserve energy and that bedding structure becoming a hell of a lot closer to food than what it normally was. So when you start hunting those food sources, and I think that's what most guys tend to gravitate towards, is like it's an easy ambush. Like, they're coming to food. Like, that's the end game usually in a late season.
A to B.
And rather than going and pushing the envelope, if you can kill them on a field edge, like, you don't have to go to the bedding.
Right.
If you can kill them on your feeder or corn pile or your food plot or whatever it is, you can kill them there and not have to push the envelope. So that's kind of the route that I've taken in the past, and I haven't had a whole lot of success in the big woods in the late season. Last year, trying to focus on different acorns and different browse. So there's some different things there, whether you're talking like greenbriers,
Honeysuckle's a big one.
Honeysuckle, and obviously red oaks, different types of red oaks. But some of that stuff is so sporadic when they're everywhere. Like, you just got to be able to really cover ground, I guess. Going back to cover and the bedding structure changing, like, it's security and thermal protection, I think, are the two biggest things. But with that, if you do have to move closer to bedding, I do think you need to be able to change your setups compared to their early season.
Oh yeah.
Heath talked about this.
Lowering in the tree.
Yeah. Typically in the late season, it seems like winds are a little more consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's because there is less foliage, there's less
to block
obstruction there. But being lower in that cover, I think, probably is even more critical than what it normally is, just because of the lack of cover and the pressure that have been added to those deer or negative encounters that they've had with hunters over the last couple months.
And because that bedding structure is changing and they're kind of herding up, you're going to have more eyes on you.
Yes.
You're going to be, like, your movement has to be a lot more prepared. You have to move less. You have to be ready a lot quicker because you have more eyes on, like, he was talking about a specific encounter with a big deer that he killed. He had, like, a group of, like, 10 deer coming through, and they were all kind of in, like, a single file line headed to the food source, and he was the 6th deer in the group. So the 5 deer have to get past him before he can even draw his bow.
Sure.
So, like, he had to get lower in the tree because that's where the cover was. You probably have to hunt maybe a little bit bigger of a tree than you may have set up in the early season, because that tree, if it's wider than the width of your body, can give you added cover.
Mm-hmm.
If you're hunting a pencil-sized tree and your shoulders are sticking out across it, you're going to stick out.
Right.
So your setups have to change pretty drastically compared to what you could get away with in, say, November.
100%. To that point, too, I think if you're hunting out of a stand, I think if you do have it nailed down to that exact trail, setting up, behind the tree, I think could
help you out.
Yeah, big time. Being able to shoot strong side shot without physically standing up, I think, is another benefit. And the same thing with the saddle. But I mean, I think that those are probably the basics. One thing that, beating the eyes, that is one con to setting up on those field edges or on those food sources where those, 4 or 5 does, that doe family group's going to come out and congregate.
You got a bunch of deer coming out.
Beating that many eyeballs on a food source it's tough. It can be hard.
Yeah.
It can be very hard.
He talks about a lot. He strategizes for the late season. So he'll go take pine trees and he'll take pine limbs and stuff. And if he has a field edge set, he'll put pine branches around his set. Mm-hmm. He might not be in a pine tree, but he'll zip tie or something, put pine branches around his set so it's already ready for the late season to have that added cover. Because finding a tree right now that has added cover, if you don't have like a red oak that still has leaves on, your choices are pretty limited.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to kind of go back and talk about when I asked about the like those keys, like what are your targets, I wanted to mention like why those things are important and kind of like how to analyze that from your photos and using weather data to know when to strike. The key thing that I've found in the late season especially, it seems like their movements are a little bit, you can predict movement a little bit easier. So you mentioned temperature drop, wind speed, precipitation. The key to that is all three of those things are changes. And you have the temperature dropping, the temperature's changing. You have the wind speed dropping, you have the wind speed changing. You have precipitation, you didn't have precipitation, and then you have precipitation. The change in weather is what's going to be what you're going to want to look for to trigger that movement. That could be straight southwest winds for 5 days and then you get a north. That could be you have cloudy days for 5 days and then you have a bright bluebird, high pressure, barometric pressure day. That could be, like we said, a 20-mile-an-hour wind for 3 days and then the next day it drops to 7. That could be a 40-degree temperature drop, then it drops to 20. Anything like that is going to be a good thing to trigger. But another thing to look past that is when you have that cold front come in and you hunt the backside of that cold front, what happens next? Does it stay stagnant for 5 more days? Is it 20 degrees again? Okay, now you need another change to trigger more movement. So that's something that I always find myself hunting that change too soon. I don't wait until it passes. I'll see a day on the forecast that it drops from 40 to 20. I'm like, I got to hunt that day. The next day is probably better on the backside of that front. But then you have a 40-degree temperature. Then you have 20 for the next 5 days. That next 5 days, like the backside of the front, that first 2 days is going to be good. And then it's going to slow down again because you have stagnant weather and you need another change. When Heath was talking about his perfect storm, his perfect late season storm, it was you have pretty stagnant, overcast, cloudy days in the 40-degree temperature range. Then you have a 25-degree day that dumps 6 inches of snow. Then that stays for another day, only another day. Then you get another mist of like a half inch of snow. And then the day after that is high pressure, bluebird, sunny skies. And he said it's like that 4-day stretch is going to be dynamite and a lot of mature deer will die. I think like that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking at my cell cameras. I'm paying attention to, okay, this deer's showing up 45 minutes after dark. He's on my food source every day, every other day. I know he's around. This is where he wants to be. Then I look at the weather. Okay, what's going to be that change? What am I looking for? If it's that 40 degrees drops down to 25, okay, what do the next few days look like? Is it 25 degrees for the next 6 days? If it is, you know you have to strike on that first day after, because that's when it's going to happen, because then it's going to become stagnant and everyone's going to be like, oh, well, the temperatures are cold. The deer should be up on their feet moving. Well, it was cold, and now it's stagnant. It's still temperature-wise, it's still cold, but there's not that front. There's not something to trigger the extra movement. They're going to get back on that pattern. They're going to start coming back to the food. It's rare that you get a mature buck coming to a food source every day in the late season. So those trigger events that you're looking for, that's where like your cell cameras and the weather data combined can be like super crucial if you know what to look for and you're paying attention to it.
So it's specifically last year, you've been running as many or maybe more cell cameras than I have.
Probably.
When you were, I guess, looking at some of the cell cam data last year, was there any surprises that you found like in the late season?
Yeah, so one thing, I'm glad you brought that up because I almost forgot to talk about it. When those temperatures are like super frigid, the warmest part of the day was something like when the sun's high in the sky, the warmest part of the day, like it could be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it could be noon, it could be 1 o'clock in the afternoon. A lot of deer, a lot of bucks are feeding during that the warmest part of the day. You think to yourself like, I gotta wait till it's really cold. But if you have like 6 degrees in the morning and you have 4 degrees at night, that middle range, like when it warms up, it's going to be 20 degrees. That's when they're going to get up and feed because that's when they're going to lose the least amount of calories to do so. When it's 6 degrees and windy, like think about yourself, you have to use a lot of calories to stay warm. A deer's out in the frigid cold, like he's trying to keep as much caloric intake in his, like he doesn't want to use a lot of calories. And because they're eating less too, like how you talked about their metabolism slowing down, when they do feed, it's going to be when it's easiest for them.
Yeah.
So that warm part of that's something that was like, geez, what are these deer doing? It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things. And like the wind speed change thing is something we talked about. Like that was like, dude, it was almost instant. It was like if it's 20 miles an hour, the cameras are dead all day long. And if you see in your forecast, like at 10 p.m. it's going to drop to 6 miles an hour, you could almost set your clock.
Yeah, it seemed like it wasn't even like the time of day or time frame that
didn't matter.
Happened. Yeah, it didn't have any, or I should say not any, but it had a hell of a lot less influence on that movement than what I had ever thought.
Yeah.
And that's one of the cool things when you're running cell cameras. It's like, and we've talked about this in the past too, but it's almost like instant data in your mind because you don't have to go back and there's just a lot less work involved tying the weather data to that trigger of movement. Like it's just instant. Oh, this buck showed up. It's 10 p.m. The wind speed just dropped. Like you can look at all that stuff within 10 seconds and know whether that deer was bumped or if like he actually moved based on the weather.
That's why I think this conversation is so important, like to know what to look for. Mm-hmm. If you're getting those pictures of deer and you're just like, oh, it's a nice buck, and you're not really analyzing what's going on, you're going to miss a lot of opportunities. You can pick up like specific tendencies of certain deer. If you're after a specific deer, like you'll hear a lot of people talk about this buck moves after a rain front every time. If you know that and you know the weather's coming, you can capitalize on it. But if you're getting those pictures to your phone and you're just like, oh, nice buck, and that's all, and you're like, oh, he daylighted today, and you don't analyze why, you can't then say, okay, this is going to happen again and know when it's going to happen again.
Yeah, you're not using that, to your benefit at all, just saying you get a picture of a buck. I want to go back to the surprise of that deer moving at, let's say, like the temperature high of the day, like in midday. At what temps did you see that start to happen? Because that's something that you picked up on, and we talked about in the office a little bit, but I don't think that probably happens when it's 30 degrees and the high for the day is 40 degrees. So at what point did you start to see that trigger?
It'd have to be like single digit.
Yeah.
Cold nights, cold mornings, and then that temperature raising into the 20s. Mm-hmm. Like even 15, like whatever the warmest part of the day, when you have those single digit and below temperature days, it's not going to happen, like you said, when it's 30 degrees for a low. They're not going to just go walk around when it's 50 degrees and eat because it's going to be hard on them again. It's going to be hot and they're going to burn calories. That I didn't see it really start to happen until you got 10 degrees and below for the low, and then like 15, 20 degrees for a high, maybe 30 degrees for a high is when they chose to feed during that.
So
below freezing.
Single digit lows and like a 10 to 15 degree
higher temperature.
Higher temperature for the daytime high.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the one of the other super surprising things to me was like Jared Scheffler and Chancey talk about this all the time with like the super cold fronts.
Yeah.
Like if you have average temperatures in your winter area, say it's 35 degrees for a high, if you get like a 35 degree day and then it drops to 5 degrees for a high, that's not going to be good for deer movement.
Yeah.
Like I used to be like, oh my God, the colder, the nastier, the better. It's a 30 degree temperature drop. Jeff Sturgis would lose his mind on his algorithm. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking like, okay, this is when it's going to go happen. Then I go sit out there and I don't see anything and I'm just freezing. And when you think about like why, when it's 5 degrees out and they have to go move a long way to go feed, like they have to save their calories trying to keep themselves warm. Survival's the number one thing. And like, I don't know what it is about it. I don't know if Jared and Chancey have anything behind that, but like the super cold fronts or the super big changes in weather seem to shut deer movement down more than like if you think about it as a cold front.
Well, I think it's things that are extremely out of the norm, and that's something that I noticed in Kansas. And I spent a lot of time glassing after I filled my tag.
Yep.
I was out there for almost another week just glassing and trying to find deer, watching deer, seeing what deer are doing, how they're moving, what they're, all of it. And one of the things I noticed, Kansas, it's windy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not abnormal to have 15, 20 mile-an-hour winds. Like that's a normal day in Kansas.
Yep.
I noticed two things while I was glassing out there. One is on the days that it was calm and next to zero wind, because we had a few days like that, those were the days that I did not see as many deer. Now, whether those bucks were in lockdown, they were in timber with does, like whatever the case was, maybe it was just a coincidence. I don't have enough experience out there to draw any conclusions as to why, but it's something.
Speculate.
Yeah, it's something that I noted. Like
Yep.
when the 15, 20 mile an hour winds, I'm seeing deer because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's what they're used to there. Like that's the normal
Average.
Yeah. Now we had days that was 25 plus. We still saw deer.
Yeah.
And then days that was literally no wind.
Shut down.
Yeah. So that was one thing that I saw. And the other thing, like Chancey and those guys talk about are like, they're anti-cold front or anti-extreme cold front. But I think that just really plays into what deer are used to, what is abnormal, what is normal. So if you're in an area that, let's say like upper Wisconsin, Minnesota, like when you have those temperatures that are normally in the single digits, like you're still looking for that change on the other end.
Yep.
It's different here in Ohio. It's different in Kentucky. So that's one thing to kind of, I don't know, if you're a new hunter or newer hunter listening to this, like don't think that we're speaking on these things in context that is like a blanket for like all of the Midwest, because I don't think it is. I think it's
the change.
Regional.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to like those trigger events. I just wanted to like really emphasize that it's a change.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever's normal, something changes, like whatever that is. So that's what you want to target. Something like a significant change in weather of some front.
Yeah. One of the other things that I've seen too in the late season, going back to like the bedding shift, and Steve Shirk talks about this, is I guess it's geared a lot towards precipitation, but deer using pines or some type of evergreen tree as bedding because they have some type of cover or shield
from
protection from the elements. Yeah, and that little airport piece that we don't have access to anymore, but there's just a small little cluster of pines there. And I mean, there's probably 5 or 6 pine trees there on that.
Not many. Yeah.
I mean, not a bunch. But when we would see weather events or precipitation events, those doe family groups would bed underneath those pine trees.
Yeah, and when you think about like shed hunting techniques, a lot of guys talk about shed hunting pine areas because when the temperatures are down and they need that thermal cover, they're bedding in pine areas.
Yep.
One thing that I wanted to mention, what have you seen any significance in like bluebird high pressure days compared to overcast days? A lot of guys talk about like the jury's thing is like a high pressure bluebird day. Do you think that's because it's a change from like an overcast to a high pressure sunny day, or do you think there's anything to that?
I don't really know. I can't really speak on it one way or the other. I can tell you that those higher barometric pressure days have been like days of interest because it's the back side of the front, and maybe it's not necessarily the pressure that I'm after, but it's the back side of the change.
Yeah.
But I can't honestly say that activity has been better on a day that specifically had high pressure versus an overcast day. I can't give an answer on that. I can't speak on it.
That's something that when I'm trying to wrap my head around, like why Heath Sisko would say like after that front comes through, he wants a super high bluebird high pressure day. And the only reason, like when you think of what everyone talks about, like you have guys like Don Higgins, you have guys like Jeff Sturgis, you have guys like the juries. There's people that are barometric pressure people, and there's people that aren't, and both work. So why is that? Why can they both work? And the only thing that I can draw from this is that when it's overcast for a bunch of days and then you get a bluebird day, it's a change. You have the sun coming out. It's going to be a little bit warmer for the deer. It's going to feel better. When I know it's not late season, but it's early season. It's still bed to food. When I killed that deer in North Dakota, the first night that I saw him, I knew I was going to see him because it was hot, sunny for like 5 days in a row. And then we got an overcast day where it was cloudy. And I knew he was going to show up that day. And I was kicking myself because I wasn't hunting him. Because when those clouds rolled in, I was like, oh, my God. Like, did I miss an opportunity here. And then the next few days after that were cloudy. And the activity levels were lower or later in the day than they were when those clouds rolled in. So when I think about that, and sometimes I'm just looking for a reason to hunt.
Sure.
And that's when I see like, okay, it's going to be cloudy, then it's going to be sunny. Maybe that's all I need to tell me to go hunt. Maybe that's why I have a good hunt, because I'm out there. But that's what drew that question for me, because like you hear people talk about high pressure barometric days, sunny days. I don't know that it's the pressure. I don't know that it's not the pressure, but I think it's the fact that there's something changing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's like deer are going to do deer things every single day, regardless of you're out there or not. They're going to bed. They're going to get up. They're going to browse. And then they're going to get up and move to the evening food source. It's just a matter of
when.
Does one of these triggers that we're talking about, does it buy you an extra 15 minutes?
That's all you need.
Because that's ultimately what it boils down to. Like, do you get just that little bit of early movement that that puts you in the game when maybe you normally wouldn't, if you were hunting a specific food source or travel corridor or trail or whatever. But then there's also like, you have all these I'm gonna call it beast tactic guys, and just throw all that out the window and just crawl up in there and get next to them, and then none of this stuff even matters.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you a little bit about that. Like, what do you think it takes to kill a deer when you don't have those weather changes coming in? So Illinois, for example, like Jake's season ends in January. A lot of times you're not getting those cold front changes until after their season's over.
Yeah.
And last year, for example, when he had that conversation with Heath, he had 40-degree days up until the last day of the season. So he was talking about like, okay, well, what do I do? Everyone says in the late season, I got to hunt food sources. Everyone says like, okay, late season, I got to be on food. So what do I do when there's no trigger, but I have a tag in my pocket. Am I not going to hunt? What Heath talks about is having in a perfect world, having 2 different farms with target deer or specific deer, 2 different areas that you can do, that you can go in and hunt. He'll push the envelope on one of them. And if he sees like, okay, I'm not going to have any weather fronts, he's still going to go in and push close to bedding. It's just a lot harder to do right now because there's no foliage.
Yeah.
It's hard to get close to their cover. But if you can sneak in, there's no reason you can't still hunt bedding if you can get in clean. So if you're not having, that was a good point that you made, like deer are still going to do what they're going to do. So if you're not seeing any of these trigger events in the forecast, and you're like, well, okay, well, that's out the window. What do I do? You can still push the envelope, and that's another good place to put your cameras. Like if you know those trigger events aren't going to come, push your cell cameras, push the envelope with them, and see like, okay, how am I going to get close to this deer and kill him? Find that trail that he's using to get to the food source an hour later, because he's going to get up and move around, especially like big wood scenarios or high timber areas where maybe you're targeting clear cuts. Maybe you have a 2 to 6 year old clear cut or whatever, and the deer feeding heavily on greenbriers and the honeysuckle. Deer are gonna get up and move around and eat, but they're not gonna move very far. They might not like leave that cover, but if you know that and you can get in clean and close, that's how you're gonna have to hunt them.
Yeah, there's no debate there. I think the conversation around weather fronts and hunting one of these triggers of movement is about keeping pressure low, trying to keep your farm fresh, being efficient with your time to ultimately, I guess, increase your odds.
Yep.
That's what it boils down to. It's like you don't want to pressure that farm or pressure that deer per se.
If you don't have to.
Because it's probably going to lower the odds when you do have, all the or a handful of conditions in your favor.
Yep.
So you're just basically buying time so you can stack some more odds in your hand. But there's the beast stuff, like, man, it works. Like,
yeah.
There's no argument. I think it's there's more and more people doing it. There's more and more people having success with it. And like if you're a guy that's hunting public or you don't care about pressuring your farm, like I don't know necessarily that the tactic needs to change. Just be aggressive. I think that you probably have to slow down in your sets, like
you have
we
to
talked
be
about.
super efficient.
Yeah, things need to be more cautious, I guess. More cautious. Cautious is probably the right word. More cautious with your approach, but the overall strategy doesn't really change.
No, I would probably target windier days in those times because that's going to offer you a little bit more cover. I would maybe target after precipitation because the ground's going to be a little bit quieter for you to slip in there. I don't think I would target like a super high sunny day where the ground's real crunchy and there's no wind. I would probably stay home that day. I don't mean, if you want to go, if that's your only day to hunt, then go ahead and do it.
Sure.
But if you're going to hunt those pushing the envelope type of ways, there still is some type of consideration to getting set up closer.
What about, this is probably way out of the box, but what about stacking deer in the late season?
I've personally, I've never tried it, but I know that's like a super, super good way. Like Heath and Justin in Illinois, like if you're going to hunt this one wood block, but all the deer over in this other wood block, but you don't have the right wind for that, you go bump them out and they only have a choice to go to where you're going to be.
Yeah.
I've never, I would almost like to try that in rifle season or gun season. Try to stack them into an area. But even if you're bow hunting, it's almost like a drive.
Essentially, yeah.
For bow hunting, but then you're just putting them in a wood block or a bedding area that you know that you can move in on. Because some areas, sometimes deer are in areas that you just can't get close enough to. And if you know that, go move them to the next bedding area that you do know that they're a little bit more vulnerable in.
Yeah. There's been I mean, I can think of a lot of big wood scenarios, like, you know, where a deer's bedded, and you are not going to kill the deer. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, you can't get in there close enough. You can't approach them. But you can't really, in the big woods, I don't know that necessarily can stack deer, but you can get them out to a different bedding opportunity. But I think the important thing there is, and I think maybe when we talked to Justin about this, he may have mentioned, I can't remember, but making sure wherever you're bumping those deer into, like if it's a woodlot scenario where, you know, you're hunting 10 acres and you're bumping them off of another 5-acre woodlot or whatever the case is, making sure that other area is already prepped.
Yeah.
And you have a stand hung or you're hunting on the ground or whatever the case is, like all you have to worry about there is access. Like you're going to your spot, you have everything's basically set up, your stand's hung. So you're not doing that with a bunch of deer that are on edge because they were just bumped.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to sneak in there and get set up. Like I think that's probably not a recipe for disaster, but you're probably definitely making things harder on yourself than what they
yeah,
could
you're just
be.
going to stack them back to the other woodlot.
Yeah. Okay, we've been going for close to 50 minutes here. Is there anything else? Anything else you want to touch on?
No, I just in closing, I just want to say, like, if you do have a tag in your pocket right now, don't panic. Stick to your guns. Don't start doing things that you don't know how to do. Stay confident and just take this as an opportunity to hone your skills for another part of the season. If you don't have a tag, don't write off the intel that you can get from the late season. You're monitoring survivors with your cell cameras or trail cameras. And if you do find yourself in a scenario next year where you do have a tag in the late season, you can use last year's intel to know what food sources deer are targeting during certain times. Organize your data at this time of year. If you're pulling cameras, make sure you're keeping your data from the previous few months, and just keep grinding, have fun.
Yep. Wise words right there. All right. Well, I think that's it until next week. We appreciate everybody tuning in. If there's any topics you guys want to hear us specifically cover over the next couple weeks, shoot us a DM on Instagram, and we will do our best to cover those topics. I know there's a couple things we have kind of scheduled out on the whiteboard, some conversations with people. We've done a handful of internal episodes now. I think we're about due to get some guests on and talk about some outside strategies, some outside thinking from what we're doing here at the office. So if there's anybody specific too, shoot us a message. We'll do our best to get them scheduled. Again, we appreciate all the reviews. That you guys, that helps us so much. We are so grateful, so thankful, so humbled that you guys take the 5 or 10 minutes to do that for us. And in closing, the last thing I want to mention is we have 2 other podcasts underneath the Exodus umbrella. So we have Trail Cam Radio, obviously, what you're listening to now. We have the Land Podcast, which is hosted by Jake, that covers basically A to B or A to Z recreational properties, whether that's investment properties, rec properties, just for managing for deer hunting. It's a whole gamut of stuff. That's something that Jake started, I think, at the beginning of summer-ish.
He's been working on it for a while, but I think it just started.
20 couple episodes, maybe 15, 20 episodes, something like that.
Yep.
Relatively new, but a lot of high-value stuff. So if anybody's interested in, obtaining land at some point in your lifetime, that is definitely a podcast to check out. At least give it 1 or 2 listens. Give it a chance.
Yeah.
And then also, I'll let you talk about the Deer Gear podcast.
Yeah. So I just started a new venture with the Deer Gear podcast where it's kind of reviewing products, but it's also talking to some of the best deer hunters in the country, what they're using and why they're using it and how they're using it. I'm not gonna just limit to like gear reviews. It's not gonna be like, oh, this product weighs 6 pounds and you should hunt out of it. I'm gonna break down a lot of why. I don't want to be too objective to it, or subjective to it, and I'm gonna also bring in some of the most prestigious premium brands and talk about their product launches. I'm going to talk to the little guy about their product launches. So there's a whole gamut of stuff around gear. So if you like gear, you like hearing about what's new, and you like hearing what guys are using to kill big deer. It's a great place to listen to.
Yeah, it's how many episodes now?
7.
6? Okay, 6, 7 episodes. It's cool to see that come to light, because I think even on Trail Cam Radio, on the YouTube channel, we've covered some gear type topics. We talked about our personal setups, things that we like, things that we don't like, the gear gadget stuff. And all of that content is so well received.
Yeah.
It seems like people really, really appreciate the time that we put into that to give us, that we give our opinions on the items that we're buying, we're using. And we try to do that in a professional manner, which you've continued on the Deer Gear podcast. So I think it's only a matter of time before, we just got to get some people into the system and plugged into it. But I think that that's going to be a big hit. I know that the couple episodes, the stick episode, I really enjoyed, where you guys broke down. I think it was you and Tony talked about, 10 different
a bunch of different climbing sticks,
and what you guys liked, what you guys disliked, and yeah. So I think that once that catches fire, it's going to do really well. So
I hope so.
But I guess that's it for Trail Cam Radio. Until next week, good luck to everybody out there in Ohio and any other state that the firearm season is rolling in. We hope you smash a big one. If you do, shoot us a picture. It's cool to see.